There are moments when I notice that Taurus is not pulled by loud calls at all. No alarms, no pressure, no one standing in front, urging them to hurry. Everything keeps moving the way it always has. The familiar road still leads home. The late-night lamp still casts a soft yellow glow across the table. On the surface, life does not look very different. And yet, somewhere inside, something very small begins to move. So small that without enough quiet, it would be easy to miss. That feeling does not arrive all at once. It is more like the moment you step into a room you have known for years and suddenly realize the light feels different today than it did yesterday. Not because someone turned on another lamp, only because you stood still long enough to notice the light changing. Nothing about it feels urgent, and yet there is something there that makes it impossible to pretend you did not see it. I once heard a Taurus say, "I do not know why, but lately I keep stopping in the middle of things. Stopping while working, stopping mid-conversation, stopping even in moments that used to feel completely familiar. Not because of boredom, not exactly because of exhaustion, just a sense that something inside is knocking very gently, asking to be heard." Taurus does not usually enjoy disruption. They are comfortable with steady rhythms, with what can be touched, trusted, relied on. And maybe that is why, when a feeling like this rises from within, it does not sound like an alarm. It feels more like a small flame, not blazing, not threatening, just quietly warm and bright enough to catch your attention. That feeling might appear very early in the morning, when the city has not fully woken yet, or late at night, when the noise has finally settled. You sit alone in a quiet room and suddenly realize you are thinking about something you set aside long ago. Not because anyone reminded you, not because you have to act on it. It simply returns on its own, naturally. Some people call that intuition. Others just call it a feeling. For Taurus, it often feels like a gentle reminder that something is waiting to be looked at more closely. Not to act on right away, only to not walk past too quickly. This kind of inner urgency does not make the heart race. It slows the steps. It causes Taurus to look more carefully at the life they are already living. They look back at the familiar road and suddenly notice a small turn they had never paid attention to before. No certainty about where it leads, only the quiet realization that it has been there for a long time. And perhaps what matters most is not where that path might go. It is the moment of recognizing that you are grown enough to pause, calm enough to listen, and honest enough to admit that the light in this familiar room has truly changed. No one is asking Taurus to leave right away. No promises are being made. Only a deeply human feeling remains. That if this moment passes unnoticed, life may continue just fine. But something, somewhere inside, may always remain quietly left behind. It is not a big mistake, not a long fall, just a very small empty space, resting quietly somewhere inside. Small enough that life can still go on as usual, yet persistent enough to return from time to time, knocking when we least expect it. And Taurus often carries that empty space for a very long time, because Taurus is used to waiting until things feel solid enough, used to standing on the edge a little longer, watching one more round, telling themselves there is no rush. There is something almost tender about this habit. Like someone standing before an unfamiliar road, not stepping forward right away, but bending down to check whether the ground is even, whether rain might be coming, whether the wind is too strong. Taurus does not like to place their foot on stones that still feel unsteady, but life does not always lay out a smooth path in advance. Some turns come without signs. Some doors open only for a brief moment, not to test anyone, but simply because they belong to that moment. if you wait long enough for everything to become completely clear. Sometimes the door is still there, it just no longer opens toward you. Taurus rarely notices this right away. Everything still feels fine. Work continues at its steady pace. Relationships keep their familiar order. Mornings begin with the same routines. Evenings end under the same familiar light. There are no obvious signs that anything important has been missed. And yet, every now and then, in a very quiet moment, that sense of absence returns, like a sigh without a clear reason. Some opportunities in life do not arrive carrying a sense of safety. They do not wait patiently to be verified. They appear before the heart has fully prepared itself, when questions are still hanging in the air, when things are not yet neat enough to be called reasonable. And that is what makes Taurus hesitate, not because they do not want it, but because they want things to be right. I have seen many Taurus hold on to a wish for a very long time in silence. They do not speak it aloud, they do not act on it. They simply place it there, like a small flame carefully shielded so it will not go out. But a flame, if it is only protected and never given air, will slowly weaken. It does not flare up. It does not disappear completely. It just keeps burning quietly, enough to warm a very small corner, but not enough to light the entire room. Waiting until things feel solid enough can sometimes be how Taurus protects themselves from pain, but there are moments when that habit quietly becomes a thin wall, keeping Taurus from touching the very things that could help them grow. Not every opportunity needs to be taken, but some opportunities, if they are not truly seen when they appear, will withdraw silently without making any sound at all. And Taurus keeps walking along the familiar road. Only somewhere deep inside, that small flame feels a little weaker than before. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind them that there was once a moment, very close, when nothing felt solid enough, yet everything felt deeply real. That sense of what feels real is never loud. It does not arrive with confidence or a feeling of guaranteed safety. It appears very quietly, like a soft knock on a window at midnight when the whole house has already fallen silent. If you are not paying attention, you might think it is only the wind. But if you listen long enough, you begin to notice that the knocking has intention, its own rhythm, as if it is waiting to be opened, not right away. But when the mind is clear enough to receive it, rare opportunities rarely arrive in a grand form. They do not line up neatly in front of us. They do not introduce themselves with clear promises. Most of the time, they look almost ordinary, so ordinary they are easy to overlook. A sentence someone says without thinking during a conversation. A passing thought that comes as you turn off the light at night. A strange feeling when standing at a familiar intersection and realizing you are hesitating longer than usual. Taurus tends to miss these moments not because they lack sensitivity, but because they are deeply accustomed to measuring everything by stability. When something does not come with a clear structure, a concrete plan, or a way to be immediately measured, Taurus often sets it aside, as if placing an object in the corner of a room, intending to come back to it later. And over time, that corner becomes so familiar that it is easy to forget there was ever something there. Some conversations seem completely ordinary at first, yet they stay with us far longer than expected, not because of what was said, but because of how it felt to say it. A quiet sense of alignment, a brief moment of being heard in a different way. At the time, Taurus may not think much of it, but later, back at home, when the late-night light casts shadows along the wall, that sentence suddenly returns, like a sound still lingering in a room after everything else has gone quiet. Opportunities like these do not force themselves upon us. They do not demand immediate decisions, but they do ask to be noticed. They ask to be held in the heart just a little longer, long enough to sense what is beginning to move inside, Because if they are dismissed too quickly as not the right time, without pausing to listen, Taurus may never realize that sometimes it is the unfinished feeling itself that signals something new trying to emerge. There are thoughts that only appear when we are most tired, when our defenses have softened. In those moments, Taurus can touch desires that feel deeply real before they have been shaped into plans. They are rough, not fully formed, yet they carry a quiet life force of their own, like a small shoot pushing up through a crack in stone, imperfect, yet determined to exist. And then, if no attention is given, everything moves on. A new day begins. Work pulls us back into familiar rhythms. Old concerns quickly fill the empty space. That opportunity does not disappear in any obvious way. It simply moves farther back, so far that Taurus is no longer sure whether it was ever truly seen at all. Yet the feeling remains. A vague sense that there was once a moment very close when life opened a narrow opening. Not wide enough to step through right away, but wide enough for light to pass in. And if Taurus is willing to stand still just a little longer, to look more closely at what seems ordinary, it may become clear that sometimes what draws the least attention is exactly where a quiet, yet deeply meaningful change begins. That depth does not make life louder. It quietly changes the way Taurus stands within their own life. One day, you walk along a familiar road. Everything is still in its usual place. Nothing has moved. And yet, the feeling is no longer the same. Not because the road has changed, but because your steps have. A little slower, a little more hesitant, as if something inside has begun to adjust its rhythm on its own, without warning. There are moments like this in life when Taurus realizes they are no longer standing still the way they once were, not running, not far away, just no longer wrapped in that sense of complete stability that used to feel so solid. The things that once felt satisfying, a familiar schedule, a safe choice, a comfortable loop, suddenly begin to feel slightly tight, like an old jacket that still fits, but no longer feels right to wear all day. This difference does not come from the outside. No one is asking you to change. No event is forcing you to turn in a new direction. Everything is still calm enough to continue, still familiar enough to avoid disruption. And yet, within that calm, there is a very light, very thin sense of emptiness that only appears when you pause long enough to feel it. It might show up when you are sitting in a familiar room, late night light stretching across the floor, and you realize you no longer feel the need to fill the silence. No music, no extra tasks, just sitting there, noticing that something inside is asking for more space, not to break anything, but simply to breathe. The safe choices that once brought Taurus peace are still doing their job. They are not wrong. They are simply no longer enough. That feeling is difficult to name because it is not dissatisfaction and it is not impulsive desire. It is more like having spent years in a small room and suddenly realizing there is a window beyond it. Not to step out right away, but to know that you were never meant to be confined there forever. If the word urgent can be used at all, it does not mean rushing. It feels more like a gentle reminder that you are standing close to the edge of something moving within you, not the line between right and wrong, but the space between continuing life as it has always been and allowing yourself to ask one new question. Taurus does not change out of curiosity alone, but when a feeling returns often enough with quiet persistence, it stops being coincidence. It becomes like a soft breeze passing through the same doorway every night, not strong, but steady. And eventually, you cannot help but notice that the door has been open all along. You just had not stood close enough to feel the air moving through it. That is where this moment is different. Not because the circumstances are new, not because the promises sound more appealing, but because Taurus has changed just enough to sense that what once felt fine may no longer be where they want to remain for a long time. And within that very small shift, there is something fragile and deeply real waiting to be looked at directly. Not to decide anything yet, only to be acknowledged as something that truly exists. And the moment that truth is acknowledged, a very familiar feeling begins to surface. Fear, not loud, not panicked, quiet and persistent, like a shadow that follows every step Taurus takes. It does not need to be named to exist. It lives in the questions left unspoken. In the moments when you look a little farther ahead and then return to the same place you were standing, telling yourself that this is still fine. Taurus understands this fear better than most, the fear of losing what has been built piece by piece, the fear that all the effort poured in over the years might lose its meaning if the direction suddenly changes, the fear of starting over when your hands are already used to the weight of what you are holding now. And deeper still, there is a quieter fear that is harder to say out loud. The fear that if you try and it leads nowhere, you will be left facing a regret that cannot be undone. This fear is not dramatic. It does not immediately push Taurus backward. It simply slows the steps, makes the gaze more cautious, and fills the mind with more calculation than necessary. There are nights when Taurus lies still in a dark room, streetlights slipping through a narrow window, casting thin lines of light across the wall. And in that brief moment, fear becomes clearest, not as an image, but as a subtle weight in the chest, as if the heart is asking itself a question it is not yet ready to hear answered. And yet, there are times when Taurus notices something else. If fear were only a warning of danger, it would have shown up long ago, steady and unchanged. But this fear feels different. It arrives with attention, with thoughts that return again and again, with a quiet sense that what stands ahead is not something small that can be brushed aside. Perhaps fear does not always appear to stop us. Sometimes it stands there like a silent gatekeeper, asking very softly whether this matters enough for you to pause and consider it so carefully. If it did not matter, Taurus would not think about it this deeply. If it did not touch something real beneath the surface, fear would not stay as long as it does. In the quietest moments, when all the reasons have been neatly arranged, when the safest options have been fully listed, Taurus sometimes senses a very simple truth: that this fear exists not because the road ahead is too frightening, but because it could lead somewhere different, somewhere unfamiliar, unproven, yet real enough that the heart cannot remain indifferent. And perhaps that hesitation is not weakness at all. It may be a sign that Taurus is standing in front of something beyond old habits, something that does not ask to be acted on immediately, but no longer allows itself to be completely turned away from. Just standing there a little longer, listening to fear instead of pushing it aside, may be enough to understand this, that sometimes fear does not appear to keep us still, but to remind us that we are very close to something that truly matters. And when that edge is finally reached, Taurus often takes a step back, not because of a lack of courage, but because of a deep instinct to keep things intact. That instinct is familiar, human. It feels like standing near a small fire at night, warm enough to comfort you, yet close enough to make you consider the distance. No one wants to get burned. No one wants to disturb the calm they worked so hard to build. That is why do not miss this has never meant rushing in blindly. It is not a call to decide everything in a single breath. It feels more like a quiet reminder that some things, if turned away from too quickly, will never reveal what they might have been. Not because they were guaranteed to turn out well, but because they deserve to be looked at one more time in a different light, from a different inner place. Taurus has their own way of meeting moments like this. No hurry, no display. Just staying with the feeling a little longer, like standing at the edge of the road at dusk, cars moving steadily past, the sky not yet fully dark, and there is no need to cross right away. Just standing there, watching the rhythm of everything, to sense where the heart is actually leaning. Some things, when set aside because they do not feel safe enough, do not resist. They do not pull you back. They quietly withdraw, allowing life to continue smoothly as it always has. And then, at an unexpected moment while you are doing something completely familiar, that feeling returns, not as whole as before, fainter, more distant, like a late-night light seen from the end of the road, still visible but no longer close enough to give warmth. Taurus is often very good at telling themselves that it can wait. Those words sound gentle, reasonable. They do not disturb anyone. They allow life to keep moving in its familiar rhythm, without forcing any immediate disruption. But deep inside, there are things that refuse to follow that schedule. They return in very private, very quiet moments, when there is nothing left to distract the mind. It might be when the lights are turned off, the room falls into darkness, and that thought appears again, incomplete, unclear, yet strong enough to make the heart sink by a single beat. Or when you pass a familiar place and suddenly remember a feeling that once existed, very real, very close, yet set aside because there was never a reason solid enough to keep it there. Do not miss this. In moments like these, does not ask for action. It only asks Taurus not to dismiss their own experience too quickly, not to downplay what keeps returning in the mind, not to call it fleeting when it clearly refuses to disappear. Some feelings do not come to pressure us. They come to ask to stay a little longer, long enough to be understood. Holding on does not mean gripping tightly. Looking again does not mean turning back. Sometimes, all that is needed is to allow yourself to stand still in that quiet room, to look directly at the small fire burning steadily inside, and to acknowledge that it is there for a reason. No need to name it, no need to conclude anything, just not to pass it by. Because there are things that, if they are not listened to when they knock very softly, will not return with the same voice. And Taurus, with their natural patience, may understand this better than anyone, that sometimes the greatest form of caution is not waiting until everything feels certain, but being honest enough to stay with your own feeling just a little longer. It is in these moments of staying that Taurus begins to realize where they are standing. Not between right and wrong, not exactly between old and new, but between two very different rhythms of living. One rhythm is familiar, steady, safe enough that it does not demand much thought. The other is still unclear, not yet formed, yet somehow impossible to ignore. This moment usually arrives quietly. No signal, no major event forcing everything to stop. Just an afternoon that moves a little more slowly than usual. A familiar road that suddenly feels slightly longer. A task done hundreds of times before, but on that day, your hands pause for no obvious reason. In that silence, Taurus begins to see something clearly. If life continues exactly as it has, everything will still be fine. Nothing will collapse. Tomorrow will still arrive. And yet, something inside will not keep moving along with you. That realization does not bring panic. It carries only a very thin sadness, light, almost transparent, like a layer of morning mist on a window. It does not block the view, but it tells you the air has changed. Taurus may remain in this moment for a long time, not because they do not know what to do, but because they are feeling the weight of a choice they cannot yet name. Some crossroads do not appear as two clearly marked paths. They appear as a quiet question. Am I living in rhythm with what is moving inside me? That question does not need an immediate answer. It only needs permission to exist. When Taurus opens just a little more, not to search for certainty, but simply to listen, the picture ahead begins to gain depth. Still unclear, still incomplete, but enough to see that life offers more than one way forward. In moments like this, the road ahead is not always a new one. It may be the same road, walked with a different inner stance, or it may be a small side path, one that had always been there, now softly lit under a late-night streetlight. Taurus does not need to step onto it right away. It is enough to stand there, to look directly at that turn, and to acknowledge that it has been seen. There is something deeply human in this moment. Nothing heroic, nothing dramatic, just honesty with oneself, brief and real. And sometimes that very moment when Taurus allows themselves to stand still between two directions, not rushing back, not yet stepping forward, becomes the most important one. Not because it decides anything immediately, but because from that point on, you can no longer say you did not know. The road ahead may still be unfinished. It may lack light, lack a map, even lack confidence, but recognizing that you are standing at a crossroads is already a profound change, a quiet change, invisible from the outside, yet strong enough for Taurus to understand this. From this moment on, whether you choose to move forward or remain where you are, you will no longer be exactly the person you were yesterday. That kind of change does not need to be proven through immediate action. It only needs to be acknowledged in silence, like turning off the lights, letting the room fall into darkness, and noticing that as your eyes adjust, you begin to see shapes that were once hidden by brightness. Nothing new appears. You are simply seeing differently. This message is the same. It does not ask Taurus to believe in anything. It does not require a decision to be made in the moment. It simply rests there, very softly, like a reminder that something has touched you, even if only briefly, and sometimes, just knowing that you noticed, that you felt it, and that you did not completely pass it by, is enough for a seed to be planted. There are opportunities that do not need to be taken immediately in order to prove their worth. They only need to be recognized, held in the heart a little longer, to see where that feeling might lead. Not today, not necessarily tomorrow. Just at some point, when life slows down just enough, you may remember that you once stood very close to a moment like this. Taurus has their own way of moving through life, slow, steady, often stepping forward only when the heart truly feels ready. There is nothing wrong with that, and yet there are times when readiness does not come from everything being clear, but from being honest with what is stirring inside. Honest enough not to dismiss a feeling simply because it does not yet have a name. Gentle enough to allow yourself to stay with a question a little longer. You may do nothing at all after hearing this story. Life may continue in its familiar rhythm. Tomorrow will still arrive with its list of things to do. But if, in a very quiet moment, you suddenly remember something that once knocked very softly at your door, then perhaps this message has already done what it needed to do. Not to change you, but to remain somewhere in your life, like a small flame that does not flare up, yet does not go out. And maybe on another night, under the same familiar late-night light, you will wonder what it was you once noticed, where you once hesitated, and which crossroads you once stood before without needing to cross right away. That question does not need a clear answer. It only needs to be held lightly and honestly. The story can end here, but the feeling does not have to. Because sometimes what matters most is not how far we go, but the moment we allow ourselves to pause, to look more closely, and to carry that quiet awareness back into everyday life, in a way that is deeply human, unhurried, and entirely your own.